This meeting is being recorded.
Yeah. All right. Are we ready, Mike?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Father, how majestic is thy name in all the earth.
Mm.
It's you and you alone. I've been reminded, this week that the resurrection is essential and it's necessary, but it's more than that. It's everything.
Mm. Yes.
Without the resurrection, there's nothing in all the earth. And I pray that we wouldn't cling to the things of this, that we would reach out to help others that are suffering.
Mm.
And some are suffering because of what they believe.
Yeah.
And I hate it, Lord Jesus, that you died for such foolishness, but you did it willingly. As my worldview that's just upside down sometimes. I want it to be focused on you. And this class has helped measurably. Focused on you and you only.
Mm.
Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay. So tonight we're going to be covering transgenderism. I wanted to ask if I know I left you to read on your own that last section, that last large section, and on when when desires are sinful, why Jesus's temptation was innocent, and why how our temptation many times is sinful. So I don't know if anybody read that. So I just wanted to just ask if you had any leftover questions from last week's session and the reading assignment.
I don't have a question, Mike, but I heard today somebody say to me that there's a large number of young people who were transgenderized by influence when they were younger, and they now are just regretting it is just not the word. It's like,
Yeah.
Are you kidding? Why did you let me do that? Go ahead.
Yeah. Yep. And we are going to get into that. It's sad, very sad. Okay, well, let's just dive into this then. And at the end of these notes, I've got a list of books that I've gone through that I think are extremely helpful. And we'll talk about some of those books when we get down to the end. But anyway, start off by quoting Al Mohler out of his book, We Cannot Be Silent. He says, the transgender revolution, even more than the movement for gay liberation, undermines the most basic structures of society. As much as the gay liberation movement rejects traditional sexual morality, the authoritative teaching of historic Christianity, and the moral sanctions of virtually every civilization, it still does not go so far as to reject gender distinctions or biological sex. That's the transgender movement that does that. The distinction between sex and gender, as we're going to see tonight, is absolutely essential to the worldview of the transgender movement. Sex and gender used to be synonymous. I don't know if you guys remember that. I remember the times when sex and gender used to be synonymous or synonyms. Everything said about sex could also be used to describe gender. Sex was gender and gender was sex. But ever since the late 1960s, the terms sex and gender have been used to describe different aspects of our male and female experience. The biological and physical aspects is described is referred to by sex. Gender refers to the psychological, social, and cultural aspects. And so because of that, we're gonna spend a little bit of time on terminology. Terminology is so important. That's the way these movements start. My sister-in-law just showed me, I think it was a TikTok presentation by a professor at Old Dominion that identifies as non-binary, and he was arguing for minor attraction, something. It's MAP. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before. Can anybody guess what it's referring to? What it's a minor attraction. I forget what the P stands for. But anyway, it's their term for pedophilia, being attracted to minors. So anyway, this is the way the sexual revolution works. Well, just about every revolution works. They come in with a whole different set of vocabulary and terminology, and it's designed in part to mask the undesirable aspects of the revolution, and to normalize the things, the new behavior they're advocating for. So anyway, we need to look at this terminology just simply so we can understand how everything's being used. Now, it has been said that trying to understand the growing number of terms in the transgender conversation can feel like fixing a flat tire on a rolling car. And the terminology is just exploding. You can't keep up with it. So we're not even going to try to come close to discussing all the terminology, but I do want us to go through a few of the most important terms. We'll start off with sex. Sex, according to the Human Rights Campaign, this is their definition. The Human Rights Campaign says sex that refers to one's biological and physical attributes, external genitalia, sex chromosomes, hormones, and internal reproductive structures that are used to assign a sex at birth: female, male, intersex. Also referred to as biological sex, anatomical sex, or assigned birth sex. Okay. So those are the four indicators right there: external genitalia, sex chromosomes, hormones, and internal reproductive structures. Those are the four criteria that a person's sex are used to determine a person's sex at birth. Now, just as an aside, This term assigned birth sex just means the sex of the baby that was observed and recorded at birth. They call that assigning sex. But we need to understand that the sex of a person is a gift from God. It is not arbitrarily assigned at birth. The sex of a person is a gift from God. It is given at fertilization and observed during gestation and at birth. So I just wanted to clarify what's meant by assigned there. Excuse me. Now, some of you may have heard the term intersex, and it may be a new term to others. Intersex is used to describe a number of medical conditions where a person is born with one or more atypical features in their sexual anatomy or sex chromosomes. For instance, a male can have, a person can be born with XXY or triple XY. And that can manifest itself in certain anomalies in their anatomy. But and the reason I bring it up is because transgender movement says not all people are male or female. There's intersex, and they use that as an argument for transgenderism, the existence of intersex. But intersex is different from transgender. 99% of people with an intersex condition are biologically male or female. Okay, they're biologically either male or female. The other 1% of those with intersex that are intersex are both, have both genitalia, at least, of male and female. But the point I don't want us to miss here is intersex does not mean neither male nor female. That's the way the transgender revolutionaries try to use the category intersex. They try to use it as neither male nor female, but that's not what it means. I think it's 1 in 1,500 are intersex, and they 99% of them are biologically male or female. There can be some effects because of the extra chromosomes and all of that, like infertility and other things can be a result of that. But biologically, they're male or female, and the 1% that aren't, they're both male and female. So intersex does not mean neither male nor female. Okay. Okay, let's go on to gender then. Gender, on the other hand, again, I'm quoting here the same group, the human, I forget what did I call it? The Human Rights Campaign, yes. So it's the same group. Gender, on the other hand, refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for men and women. So it's they say it's referring to roles and behaviors and activities and attributes that any given society considers appropriate for men and women. Gender varies between cultures and over time. There is broad variation in how individuals experience and express gender. Now, again, that's their definition. Remember, I said at the outset that prior to the 1960s, gender and sex were used interchangeably. Sex was gender and gender was sex. But now they're distinguishing the terms. Gender identity describes the psychological aspects associated with being male or female. And what we mean by that is one's internal sense of being male or female or both or neither. Gender role describes the social and cultural aspects of being male or female, masculinity or femininity, okay? And then gender dysphoria is a psychological term for the distress that some people feel when their internal sense of self does not match up with their biological sex. Now, that does not mean that they're automatically transgender. Not everyone who identifies as transgender experiences gender dysphoria. And not everyone who experiences gender dysphoria identifies as transgender. So it's important to understand that gender dysphoria and transgender are not synonyms. So just because a child is feeling some discomfort, feeling, a little boy is feeling some discomfort with being male, or a little girl is feeling some discomfort with being a female, that does not mean that they are transgender, okay? And many of them grow out of it. By the time puberty hits, they're past that dysphoria, past that discomfort, okay?
Mike, can I just advertise your sermon on gender dysphoria? I think you and Wes traded off taking some of these subjects on. It was the most, I think, encouraging and insightful presentation I've ever heard. Your sermon on gender dysphoria.
Yeah, but on gender and yes, and transgender and all of that. Yeah, so I think that's still available on the web page, on the website.
It certainly should be.
Okay, now transgender. Let's get down to transgender. Transgender means moving through and beyond the category of gender as it has been defined in the past. That's the whole purpose of the prefix trans attached to gender. It means moving through and beyond the category of gender as it's been defined in the past. It's an umbrella term. It's an umbrella term for the many ways in which people might experience or express their gender identities differently from those of us whose sense of gender identity matches our biological sex. Okay, that's what transgender is referring to. And that's the way that the term is used. Now, a similar term is non-binary. Non-binary refers to a wide range of gender identities that are not exclusively male or female or masculine or feminine. Okay. A binary is something that has only two options. In the case of gender, the options are male and female. That's the gender binary. People who identify as non-binary feel that these binary categories, male and female, do not reflect their experience of gender. Okay, so now I'm sure that just going through these definitions of these terms brings a lot of questions and comments to mind. So what I'm wanting to do is I just wanted to go through the terminology so that as we talk about it, we're all understanding how these terms are being used. And now what I want to do is I want to run just a little bit through the revolution itself. And then we'll get into biblical response to it. Okay. But again, please, at any time questions come up, please feel free to ask a question. Stop me and ask a question, or if you have a comment.
So Mike, I have just a couple quick comments.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I remember, as you said, the day when the term sex and gender were synonymous.
Yes.
I also remember, quote unquote, sex education in schools, but I believe that primarily, if not completely, was limited to biological.
Yes.
I don't remember any discussion about these other issues.
Absolutely.
And the other comment is, it just shows to me the importance of parents being a model before their children of what manhood is and what womanhood is.
Yes.
And if the parents are doing that, then it seems to me that the children are going to get a very clear understanding from the start. They don't have to go down these other roads.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, because of that, even though they're trying to indoctrinate children at very young ages, they're not as easily it's hard to change their perspective on gender because of precisely what you just said, the models that they're getting from their parents.
And of course, there's a great deal of social media now influence.
Oh, yes.
Kids, you know, they're at a different place or hearing from their parents. They're getting a lot of other stuff from other places.
Yes. Yes.
Bad stuff.
It's not easy parenting these days.
Right.
Okay. So
and the idea that we have to support our kids no matter the idea that we have to support our kids and stand behind our kids no matter what they say, otherwise we're not loving parents. So yes. That's, if someone says to them, well, did you talk to your kid about this and have you talked through it? Oh, no, I'm just going to support my child because that's how I show love.
Right. And that's so magic. That's just abdicating. And it's interesting. It's interesting because schools take advantage of that kind of attitude. So when they start teaching a lot of, and we're going to get into this whole thing of how they're coming after the children, but they will talk to the kids. They try to lead them to explore ideas of being a different gender and all of that. And when a child starts agreeing with that maybe that's true of them, they tell them to keep it secret from their parents because parents aren't normally welcoming of this. Parents are the problem. When a parent does find out, then the tactic turns to them telling the parents that they're going to make their child suicidal by not affirming them in this. So they come on real strong about the parents damaging their children's psyche and even causing them to be suicidal. So just heavy guilt trips like that. Yeah, it's sick. It's really sick. Okay, so now here's something I think we need to understand. We need to go back and look at the philosophy behind all of this. How in the world did we arrive at this point? The transgender revolution required the rise of postmodernism as an intellectual movement. And that's why transgenderism came along so much later than homosexuality. I mean, adultery and homosexuality are ancient sins dating way back from the beginning of the fall. But transgenderism, not as a movement, not as a large thing. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if there were people that had these kind of feelings back then, but the transgender revolution required a much different mindset. It required the rise of postmodernism in order to gain any kind of traction whatsoever. Because one of the tenets of postmodernism is that reality itself is socially constructed. What postmodernists say is that we can't know anything. We can only understand it from our perspective. And there's lots of perspectives throughout the world. And they just go on from that. Postmodernism actually says that reality, because of that, reality can't be known. It's what we think is reality is simply socially constructed. In other words, reality is not an objective fact or a comprehensive truth. Instead, reality is a set of socially constructed ideas and social systems used by people in power to restrain and oppress the less unfortunate. That's the central claim of postmodernism, and postmodernism claims to liberate those who suffer from oppression caused by patriarchy, capitalism, or Christian civilization. So transgenderism was absolutely dependent upon the rise of this type of thinking, of it being broadly accepted that reality is not an objective fact or a comprehensive truth. It's just our perceptions and these ideas of reality that's been constructed by the society we live in.
Mike, did you mean unfortunate or the less fortunate? You said the less unfortunate. I'm not making sense of that. To restrain and oppress.
It should be less fortunate.
Okay. That's it.
Yep. A double negative equals a positive, doesn't it?
That's what I was thinking.
I didn't get the notes this week. Maybe I should go to another place to get that, because I'm just seeing the screen and I can't make corrections.
Oh,
I can't print them out.
Okay.
I will make a note of that correction, though,
Okay, there you go.
on another piece of paper.
Yeah. So the transgender pioneers and theorists claimed that gender is one of those things that's that gender is a socially constructed reality. In other words, what they mean by that is gender has less to do with biological or scientific facts. As a matter of fact, they'll say nothing to do, and more to do with familial, cultural, and societal training. You know, the training that you get in your family growing up, in your culture, and in your society. Gender has much more to do with that. It's absolute in the training in your family, in your culture, and your society. You get reinforced what your family, culture, society considers normal. Okay. And they and this idea that gender is a socially constructed reality is absolutely indispensable to the transgender worldview. The transgender revolutionaries use the postmodern worldview to overturn and deconstruct traditional notions of sex and gender, which in their view were inherently oppressive or are inherently oppressive. That's why they needed postmodernism, is to be able to overturn and deconstruct those notions. All right. Now, I just want to remind you that, remember, we talked about this when we went right before we talked about homosexuality. The modern project is constructing the self and shaping one's identity from our desires, primarily sexual desires. So, and biblical and traditional notions of sex and gender restrain that project, and so are viewed as oppressive. In other words, the Bible, and therefore traditionally, since creation, gender has been tied to biological sex. And so they had to separate the two in order for the transgender movement to work. And they had to wait until this idea that reality is not, that reality is socially constructed. They had to wait for that idea so they could say that your gender, your biological sex, doesn't necessarily determine your gender. You remember, I think it was on Time magazine, I can't remember the guy's name, dressed up like a woman, and it was an interview with him, and he made it, I think that the article of the title, or the title of the article, came from a statement that he made that sex is not destiny. I don't know if any of you remember that. I think it was in Time magazine. It was on the cover of Time magazine. Sex is not destiny. And so being a woman or a man is not tied to your biological anatomy. So to have the biological anatomy of a man didn't determine your destiny as a man. So anyway, the Liberation Project, the Transgender Liberation Project, aims to push humanity past traditional notions of sex and gender. And as some activists argue, beyond the very notion of gender itself. So we just need to keep reminding ourselves of where society is at today. The concept of the modern self is that the self is determined by my feelings and my desires, and primarily sexual desires, as per Freud. And I use those desires to shape my identity, to construct myself. It doesn't matter what my body is like, what my body would tell me. The body is just matter. Remember, it's in the second story. It doesn't matter. It's just material that can be that we can do with whatever we want to. It's the desires and the emotions that count, and I've got to use those to shape my identity. Now, because of that, I think you can see that because of this kind of mindset, there is no end to the transgender revolution. You just keep seeing it explode and expand. In the beginning of the movement, it identified itself as LGBT, which represented lesbians, gay men, bisexuals, and transgendered. But now that anagram has just absolutely exploded. LGBTQ, QIA, and just keeps growing. Sometimes it's just referred to now as LGBTQ plus. And so you can't forget the plus. And the plus represents that there's been just limitless radical expansion of the groups identifying as sexual minorities. And they want their own rights, and they want public notice and affirmation. So the transgender movement is a movement that does not end. It just keeps going and going and going. So is there any questions on what transgender is, what the movement is, the goal of the movement, what it's trying to accomplish, how in the world we came to be at this place?
Mike, I would say that these postmodernists and such people that you've been describing have in reality, there's a good term, have created their own reality.
Yes.
Which is really not reality.
Exactly.
It's a non-reality that they call reality. All you have to do is look around you. It's just so preposterous. I don't know how that people can convince themselves of these things, except that they are, as the Bible says, willingly ignorant.
Yeah. Again, it's because believers see that a person is an embodied soul. A person is a sexed, embodied soul. And so the body contributes mightily to our identity. God created humanity, male and female, in his own image.
Yes.
And so that's the way Christians see human beings. They see them as sexed, sexually differentiated, embodied souls that bear the image of God.
Well, I
And-
still think most people would agree that there is they may not call themselves Christians or recognize it as a Christian tenet, but they still recognize that people are male and female and they have certain roles and certain qualities that makes all these other ideas just way out there, just fringe.
Right.
Most people I would think would say, they just kind of shake their heads and say, huh? You got to be kidding. This is just not reality. It's not reality.
Yeah. But there is a growing number who want to say, but it's all right for you. I'm willing to give you that freedom. I'm willing. And normally what that means, it means for that, that normally means giving them rights as a transgendered person or as a gay person. And we'll talk about that in a minute as well. But here's the thing that's very disturbing. Trans and Silky was referring to this a little bit earlier. Transforming the way children think of gender is central to the transgender movement. It's like many other revolutions. Give me your children and I'll take your country. Indoctrinate the children. And elementary school age children are being told that they should understand gender identity, not only in categories of boy and girl, but even in gender identities somewhere in between or outside these categories, as the Human Rights Campaign puts it. Gender is being presented to children as a social construct, and gender identity as a feeling-based reality, completely disconnected from a person's biological sex. I mean, teachers in these very low-level grades, even kindergarten, they'll say, some boys don't feel like a boy inside. And that's okay. And they'll do the same thing with girls, and they'll just string the conversation along and sometimes get kids agreeing with them. Yeah, I don't really feel, a girl saying, I don't really feel like a girl. I feel more like a boy, and all of that. That's what is encroaching into these sex education programs, and they're being presented with the fact that it doesn't have anything to do with your anatomy. It's how you feel about yourself inside. And these authorized sex education programs of many public schools reflect this ideological shift. And here's the key thing: without informing the parents. They keep it secret from the parents. And it is this, this shift to this postmodern transgender view of that's being taught in these sex education programs is a shift to the transgenderism and keeping it quiet and secret as much as they can from the parents. Those two things have the effect of transforming these sex education programs into a system of grooming children. Now, I know there's lots of objections to using the word grooming. Let me read you definition of grooming. This is the standard definition of grooming. Okay. And you tell me what this sounds like. Grooming is when someone builds a relationship, trust, and emotional connection with a child or young person so that they can manipulate, exploit, and abuse them. Children and young people who are groomed can be sexually abused, exploited, or trafficked. Anyone can be a groomer, no matter their age, gender, or race. Now, when I'm saying that these sex education programs are being turned into a system of grooming, I'm not saying that the individual teachers are necessarily deliberately trying to groom the children. But I am saying that when you have a program that suggests to the kids, and in many cases strongly suggests to the kids that they may not be what their biological sex indicates. And many of them in these sex education programs are almost encouraged to think along those terms that maybe they're not. In this, maybe the sex that the identity they feel inside doesn't agree with their biological sex. And I'm saying doing that and hiding that from the parents, that the individual teacher may not be trying to groom, but that kind of an embedded system is a system of grooming. It makes those children and makes them vulnerable and subject to being exploited in that way, whether or not the teacher is doing the exploitation or anything like that. I'm not necessarily accusing the teacher of being a groomer, but I am saying when they use sex education programs like that, they are using a grooming system. And that's the effect it'll have on those kids.
I think another term, a companion term or a close term to grooming might be brainwashing.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, in reality, that's what it is. It may not be intentional, but it's happening.
Yeah.
You're brainwashing these children.
Yeah. And Silky, that's the problem with parents that just want to go along with it. They think they're being loving and affirming of their kids, but they are allowing the grooming of their children is what's happening.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
No, I agree. That's exactly what's happening. And it's just, I see it so much of it's kind of what you said many classes back. It's the idea starts in your mind as something, just a tiny something small, but the acceptance of it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yep. Yeah. It doesn't stop there. Yeah, exactly. And so anyway, that's that's the danger. And so that's what the transgender revolution is all about. It is to separate our identity from our biological anatomy, and it goes right along with this modern concept of constructing our own identity based on our desires, primarily sexual desires. And this I mean, it's amazing how COVID brought this out, what's going on in sex education, even in the lower grades. So when schools shut down, they were doing it on Zoom or whatever media that they were using. And teachers didn't want parents to be in the same room with their kids as they're going through their classes. And yeah, and
Wow.
People started questioning that. Why? And then we started discovering what's being taught in these sex education classes, and that's when we started seeing this parental rights movement in various parts of the country take place. I don't know how extensive that is throughout the country, but you definitely see a parental rights movement in parts of the country. They're confronting school boards, they're ousting, they're recalling very liberal board members of the school boards. And we saw in Florida, they passed the parental rights bill, and you see all of the pushback from the leftists and the transgender revolutionaries that's happened when that bill was passed. And this is why I say terminology is so important in these revolutions. So remember what they renamed, what the opponents of the parental rights bill in Florida renamed the bill? Don't say gay. And we saw politicians jumping on that bandwagon, and the whole 9 yards. So it's these developments of like the parental rights bill, like the parental rights movement, where they're confronting school boards and they're replacing school board members. They're ousting school board members that are part of the revolution. These are deeply disturbing developments to the transgender movement, to the transgender revolutionaries and sympathizers. So I'm glad that happened.
I think things like the parental rights bill in Florida are a good thing, but unfortunately, it's assuming that the parents then, I mean, if it's turned over to the parents, that the parents are going to teach their children what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah.
They can't legislate what the parents are going to teach their children. Unfortunately, I mean, it's a start, or it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Far better than just letting it roll. But the parents aren't necessarily going to be trained themselves. That's why this study that we're having is so good.
Yeah. That's why we wanted to do this, is to arm church members with info that they need. So how should the church respond? We do need to be careful here. Christians should not deny the concepts of masculine, that the concepts of masculine and feminine are to some degree, socially constructed. What do we mean by that? Social habits, marketing forces, personal experience. When I say marketing forces, I'm talking about advertisement and that sort of stuff. Personal experiences and cultural expectations do influence our ideas of masculine and feminine. But here's the difference. That does not mean that the basic understanding of humanity as male and female is itself socially constructed. You can go to different cultures and you can see masculinity and femininity expressed a little bit differently in cultures. That's not the same thing as saying that male and female, humans as male and female, is socially constructed. It's just saying that how femininity and masculinity to a little extent, how it's lived out is different from culture to culture. But of course, the revolutionaries want to blow up any cultural differences like that into a full-blown notion that maleness and femaleness are gender is just completely socially constructed. So the Christian response to the transgender movement has to begin with scripture. Genesis 1 and 2 presents our embodiment as male or female as essential to our self-identity as humans made in the image of God. We've got to start there. That's the way Genesis 1 and 2 presents it. And I like the way Denny Burke puts it in his book, What is the Meaning of Sex? We dare not miss that God created sexual differentiation. The terms male and female are not social constructs. They are not social roles foisted upon mankind by the accretion of culture and tradition. That is the incremental accrual of culture and tradition. Male and female designate the fundamental distinction that God has embedded in the very biology of the race. Okay. So human beings are sexually differentiated, embodied souls that bear the image of God. That's what they are. That's what Genesis 1 and 2 teaches, and that's what we have to insist on. That's so we can here's what I'm saying. Just because a little girl is a tomboy doesn't mean she's not female.
Mm-hmm.
Little girls that enjoy playing with boys stuff and doing sports and that sort of thing, that's fine. But that's not even gender dysphoria. Our concepts of masculinity and femininity need to make room for that. Same thing with boys that like to play with Barbies. you know. That doesn't mean that they're struggling with their identity as a boy or as male. Just means they like those things. They like the color of pink. You know, so our concepts of masculinity and femininity need to be flexible enough to include that. But it's those very things that the transgender revolutionaries seize upon and says, aha. I remember reading the story of one, or being told the story of one gal who's as a little girl, she had a very low voice for a girl. And she had teachers tell her, oh, you must really be a boy inside, and encourage her toward just because of the low register of her voice. So yes, we are sexually differentiated, embodied souls, and gender involves roles that are not completely disconnected from our biological sex, but masculinity and femininity cannot be so narrowly defined as to say that if a girl wants to play with guns or GI Joes, that that means that inside she identifies as a boy. No, that's not true. That just means that your concept of masculinity and femininity is too rigid.
I'm afraid that some of our cultural habits in the past have lent to that. I'm thinking of the term women's work.
Yeah.
It has been, maybe that's not true much anymore, but also the idea that a man just can't change a baby's diaper. You know,
Yes.
that's just not, that's
right.
not what a man does. And that's not true.
Exactly.
You know, I think a man should be involved in that kind of thing. I mean, after all, he's the father, he's the parent too.
Yeah, and Scripture gives men the responsibility of nurturing their children as well as the mothers.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Right.
and so yeah, we've got to be careful that we don't so narrowly construct masculinity and femininity that it puts words in God's mouth that He never said.
Right.
And so what differentiates the transgender movement is that is its intention to change one's gender identity from one's biological sex. That's the standout feature of the transgender movement, this intention to change one's gender identity from one's biological sex. However, under scriptural authority, we hold to be born a male is to be a male. To be born a female is to be a female. Now we're going to get into here at the end. We're going to get in a minute about, well, what about female brain and male brain, and men with female brain and women with male brain, and all of that. Well, I'm just going to lump that in with this last segment here, the morality of reassignment surgery. I think we need to talk about that. Because of how we view gender and biological sex, the way we view human beings as sexed, embodied souls bearing the image of God, that leads us to have certain views regarding the morality of reassignment surgery. Christians must reject the reality and morality of gender assignment surgery. Now, we got to be careful here. We certainly sympathize with the anguish and confusion that would cause a person to seek such drastic measures, but we cannot accept that a surgical procedure or other medical means like hormonal treatment can actually change a man into a woman or a woman into a man. What we're seeing in our society is an exercise in mass deception. That's what it is. Just because a woman has her breasts removed and has other reconstructive surgery and takes hormones, just because a man does this exact same thing, has surgical procedures to change their anatomical morphology and takes hormones and all of that, does not mean that they are changed into the opposite sex. It simply amounts to mutilation of the body. And to amputate and cosmetically reform the body is an act of defiance against the creator's purpose. That sounds harsh, but that's in reality what it is. So we need to be compassionate, but compassion and love does not mean to be soft on the truth or to compromise the truth. We need to be firm in our convictions. It's not loving to say to Silky, going back to your example, it's not loving for those parents to say, oh, I just want to affirm whatever my child is feeling. They think that's loving, but it's not. It really isn't. And so we need to get over this idea that to be compassionate and loving to people means that we can't tell them the truth.
That's right.
That we've got to find some way to affirm them. But no, we need to tell them the truth, but be sympathetic to them, be friends to them. They may reject us as friends. They may not want to have anything to do with us, but we need to be we need to recognize the anguish and pain some of them go. Now, some of them are doing this just to be able to go into the women's bathroom and take pictures. Some of them may be doing this so they can win a championship, that sort of thing. But there are people who are really confused and in anguish over it.
And I think there's also the confusion when people see like some churches who are like at the gay pride parades and hanging rainbow flags. Like it's confusing to people.
Yes, and that's a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up. We've got to be careful. You see believers on social media also, where they may talk sympathetically to people that are embracing the homosexual or transgender, or even what is it when they, what is it called when they dress up, when a guy dresses up like a woman and goes reads stories to kids as a library? What's that called? I keep forgetting that. I don't
In
know.
drag, that's one term they use.
Yeah. Drag queen story hour.
Cross-dressing, I think it is.
Yeah, cross-dressing, and libraries have drag queen story hours that are becoming popular, and all of that. And I have seen believers try to be sympathetic with people over those things on social media. It sends a wrong message.
Mhm.
At the very least, it's misleading. But at the worst, it signals that you've bought into the whole sexual revolution. And you're right, Silky. I definitely believe that evangelicals showing up at those pride parades, I think that's exactly what they're doing. They are sending a very wrong signal. I think that is exceedingly unwise. So I like the point that Moeller makes here. He says, where, and this is from his book, We Cannot Be Silent, where one might claim that there is a disconnect between self-consciousness and embodiment. In other words, what you're thinking about yourself internally and your body, where one might claim that there is a disconnect between self-consciousness and embodiment, the Christian must tenderly and compassionately advise that it is the mental, that is the self-consciousness and sense of identity, that must be conformed to the body, rather than the body conform to the person's mistaken self-perception. So there's all kinds of brokenness out there. I mean, what we need to understand is our sinfulness, our brokenness, even touches our biology, our chromosomes. It touches every aspect of humanity, and the only true remedy for brokenness, including sexual brokenness, is the gospel.
Amen.
So we want to be tender. We want to be compassionate. We must be very careful not to make fun or mock, but yet we need to remain firm in these biblical convictions, because here we know this. We know the transgender revolution, the sexual revolution in general, the critical theory revolution, the postmodernism in general. Those systems will not deliver on their promises. They cannot deliver on their promises. What they will leave in their wake is burned over people that get burnt by these revolutions, these thought revolutions and behavior revolutions. They will get burned over by them. And so we as believers need to have a tender, compassionate presence with alongside them the whole way through. So on the other end, when the promises have failed, have never materialized, and they're burned out and devastated and all of that, they can still look at Christians and say, you know what? They've disagreed with all of this that I've gone through, but they've remained my friend through all of this. And then we have an opening with them.
Mhm.
So that is all that I've got, that I've written down anyway, on transgenderism. I wanted to point out some of these books to you, and I do want to take questions too. These first two books, Al Mohler's "We Cannot Be Silent" and "The Gathering Storm." I think "We Cannot Be Silent" was written in 2015, and "The Gathering Storm" was written in 2020, I'm thinking, or 2019, or 2020 or 2021. I can't remember now. But they are great books. And what he does is he covers a whole bunch of issues that are brewing in Western society, and he brings Christian worldview to bear on them. They're very good, and they're very readable. And I've mentioned Nancy Pearcey's book before, "Love Thy Body." It's very good. She is readable. Silky, I think I mentioned to you before, Sam Alberry's book, "Is God Anti-Gay?" That's just a little book by the Good Books Company, I think.
Okay.
And he is a pastor who has struggled all of his life with same-sex attraction. He does not identify as a gay Christian or anything like that. But he's very good on homosexuality. Well, he's good on a lot of things, but that's a good little book. Kevin DeYoung's book is very good, and he's very readable. And it's a little book too, but don't let the size fool you. It has a lot of substance to it, but it's very readable, very accessible. Rosaria Butterfield. I don't know if you guys have heard of her before. Before she got saved, she was a tenured professor at, was it Rutgers? I can't remember now what university. It was a prestigious university back east. She got her PhD in English literature. She's tenured professor teaching queer theory in a lesbian relationship, and she got saved. And she's now married, a mother of a Presbyterian pastor, homeschooler. And her two books here are incredibly insightful. This first one, "The Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert," she goes through how she got saved. She goes through where she was at and how God saved her. Is very good. And then her second book, "Openness Unhindered: Further Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert on Sexual Identity and Union with Christ." Both those books are very good. We've talked about Carl Trueman's book, "The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self." It's outstanding. It's a brilliant book. But like Deepak mentioned previously, it's not an easy read. It's academic. However, I just got it. He just came out with an easy to read version of the book. It's called Strange New World. And so that would be good. Anyway, those are, in my opinion, those are some of the best books you can get and read to inform yourself. So I'll just read that. Any questions?
Mike, I'd like to suggest that some conversation go into the idea of appearance. I know that a lot of people will use the verse, man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. Nevertheless, like has been mentioned before, we need to not be sending the wrong signals. And I think as long as children are in the home, the Christian parents, but especially Christian parents, should be trying to encourage their children, their male children, to look like males, and their girl children to look like girls. I mean, I realize there's certain exceptions, you know,
Right.
like playing sports or whatever. But honestly, I think the parents are failing when they're allowing their children to just look like, you know, a boy look like a girl or a girl look like a boy, especially in our present society and all of the forces that are involved, you know.
Yes. And I meant to bring that up, and it just totally slipped my mind. Deuteronomy 22:5 says, a woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. And then 1 Corinthians 11, when Paul was talking about the head covering there in church, again, he talks about a woman looking like a woman and a man looking like a man. Now, again, these are, to a certain extent, culturally affected, influenced. I mean,
nevertheless, though,
they
like
wore
you said,
robes back in
children are in, as long as the children are in the home, you know, they're underage. Seems to me that there ought to be some rules about that.
Yeah, no, I think that they should. What I'm saying is, back in Deuteronomy, men wore robes. We don't wear robes now. So I'm saying, to a certain
And the
extent,
Scottish people wear kilts.
yeah. So to a certain extent, but within that culture, I mean, it's pretty clear when a boy is trying to look like a girl and a girl is trying to look like a boy. And that's what scripture is talking about.
Right.
And yes, and so parents should be teaching their kids that. That's right. I agree. Any other questions or comments or?
No, I was just thinking, you know, when you were suggesting those books, one of the books is called We Cannot Be Silent. And I feel like the go-to is to be silent in these.
Yes, you are right. And that's the whole point of his book. You are right. The go-to is to be silent. It's because for so long, we have enjoyed the freedoms and traditions being shaped in large measure by the Judeo-Christian worldview. The certainly hasn't been a Christian nation, but a lot of the laws and stuff and traditions have been shaped by the Judeo-Christian worldview. And now it's the church is not only on the fringe of society, but it's regarded as on the lunatic fringe of society. And so now it's not so comfortable anymore. And so there's this great temptation to be silent.
I'm looking at Ephesians chapter 5. Well, you could read the whole chapter, you could read the whole book. But
Yeah.
anyway, I keep going back another verse. Verse 10, proving what is acceptable unto the Lord, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. For it is a shame even to speak of those things which are done of them in secret.
Yeah. Yeah. We are to be, as Paul says in Philippians 2, we are to be shining lights in a crooked and perverse generation.
That's right. Right.
And as Jesus says, you don't stick a light under a bushel.
Yeah,
That's right.
so true.
Yeah. Next
I'll
week.
learn about it in this
Pardon?
way. I said learning about it in this way and attending a class like this is the first step.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Next week, we're going to be going over critical theory and identity politics. So CRT/I. And I'll just give you a teaser here. The R is not the problem in CRT. It's the CT that's the problem. It's the critical thinking, the critical theory rather. James Lindsay, I think is his last name. He co-authored a book called Cynical Theories. And if you look at when you look at the book, the cover of the book, it actually has critical theories on it, and then it has the word critical crossed out and cynical written above it. But anyway, yes. So we will be going over that next week.
Great. Look forward to it.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Mike.
You bet. You bet. You guys have a good evening.
Okay, you too.